What's up, YouTube? Welcome into another YouTube live show. I appreciate all of you being here. We've already got a decent crowd here waiting for me to jump on, and I'm only 1 minute late from the promised 7:45 start time today. So that's a good thing. It's a good thing. I'm not running on too poor of John Standard Time today. We actually have a lot to cover today. I had basically an entire show planned out before I stumbled across the latest Dennis Dodd update that has given us some new TV number projections when it comes to the Big 12 and the Pac 12. Now, this is not some wide gap. If you're somebody that has been in John Wilner's mentions or John Canzano's mentions, any of those guys here recently about what's going on with the two conferences, and you've been claiming that the Big 12 is going to put a titanic sort of gap between the two conferences financially, you're not going to love this update, but it is putting the Big 12 slightly in front of the Pac 12. And I think that kind of hits on the general theme of where I was going to go with this live before I found that story today, which is maybe a bit of like burying the hatchet, so to speak, because frankly, I'm kind of exhausted with the back and forth right now between the Big 12 and the Pac 12 and Canzano and Wilner, who now, by the way, have a podcast together. I'm not sure everybody was aware of that. They do have a podcast together here at this point. So that is interesting. I'm a little tired of it. I'm frankly getting a little tired of it. We very badly need the actual football season here so we can start letting the smack talk be about football as opposed to conference realignment. I do agree with that statement. So I'll take you through the latest of it, catch you up basically on the drama. I mean, that's what I feel like these shows are turning into now every day. It's what is the last thing that Wilner tweeted? What is the last thing that Canzano tweeted, taking shots at Big 12 fans and what was said in retaliation? What have these guys written lately? With the tone, it's always about the tone and how it comes out about the Big 12 that I think is what really fires people up more so than just the content. But I digress. That's the main gist of where we're going today. Let me scan my outline. We have the Dennis Dodd article had an update on a consultant that the Big 12 is working with, which is interesting. He also reported the Big 10 is cooling right now on adding Pac-12 teams, which is a part of why I get back to, again, like maybe we're in bury the hatchet mode a little bit here, because I don't think anything is going to happen. Here's that word again, imminently. I don't think anything is going to happen imminently. I know John Wilner continues to project that we will have some sort of resolution by the end of the fall, but I think that resolution could just be, for right now, the Pac-12 is going to stay put, and then we'll wait and see what happens with the Big Ten here in the next couple of years. I do think that is very much a possibility, but lots can play out, lots can change. So we've got those two updates from Dennis Dodd, again, the latest from Wilner and Canzano, and even an admission really from Wilner and Canzano that we're all kind of on the same page. Like that's the bottom line. I feel like this whole fight, so to speak, back and forth between everybody has been with two sides that are relatively on the same page, but the tone that has come out with everybody and the history that is embedded in Big 12 fans has caused and created a lot of this angst and back and forth between everybody. So I'll do my best to try and put some context to that. If we have time for it, I continue to be impressed by the new Big 12 Twitter. Now that Brett Yormark has taken over, a little bit of shade thrown at the Pac-12. I know that goes against everything I just said, but I took notice of it. Texas has set a season record for season ticket sales. How about that? A record in season ticket sales for Texas football to be disappointed this year. So, we've got that. And then, hey, maybe we got to pour one out for Shasta 6, the Houston mascot. Pour one out for Shasta 6 because he passed away. That's tough. I actually saw that on TMZ of all things today. All right, so there's the rundown basically for what I have for the show. You guys know, if you've been here before, you will dictate a lot of where this goes, and you can do so obviously by hopping in the chat, but there are enough people there. I don't get a chance to see much of what goes on unless you do donate. You can do that by clicking the $ below the chat box where it says say something. That will stick your chat up at the top of my screen so that I can see it, and it will ensure that your question or comment does make it onto the chat tonight. So again, click the $ below the chat box where it says say something to donate and make sure that your question or comment gets on here. Plus, you are supporting the work that I'm doing to bring you Big 12 content on a week in, week out basis. Seeing a lot of familiar faces in the chat so far. Appreciate that. I see Eric Cartman hopping in with an RJ Jones shout out. K-State just got a 4-star basketball commit today. The second 4-star prospect in the 2023 class, Jerome Tang, doing work. Thank you, Baylor fans, all of you guys out there for gifting him to K-State, because the recruiting dividends are paying already. So that is great. Now, let's get off and running with this Dennis Dodd update, okay? I think this supersedes the general overall story arc of like, hey, do we really have to continue fighting with the Pac-12 as much as we are right now? So let me make sure I get this guy's name right. I just have it as Shapiro there. He has a first name conceivably. Mark Shapiro. He is the president of Endeavor, which is a powerful global sports and entertainment content company. They're advising the Big 12 on its next media rights deal. So Mark Shapiro has played a role in a number of TV rights negotiations before, and he is working basically as a consultant right now for the Big 12 about this. And it says, thus far, this is Dodd now that I'm quoting, thus far, Shapiro is getting high marks for his work with the Big 12. In fact, conference athletic directors are giddy at what Endeavor has already accomplished by positioning the Big 12 ahead of the Pac-12, if only slightly in terms of earning power. Without Texas and Oklahoma, the Big 12 is valued north of $30 million annually per school, CBS Sports reported last week. And that was one of those where I was like, I don't know. I feel like there's been so many reports of these numbers by different various outlets, and even like the major ones, like The Athletic and CBS Sports, we've seen different numbers floated out there at different points. And then, Canzano and Wilner will reference others and shoot down others, and it's hard to keep track of all of it. But apparently, CBS Sports did report at some point the Big 12's value would be north of $30 million annually per school. That's not really eye-popping numbers. I know there have been some hope here based on some of the projections that came out from Navigate, or at least the reported Navigate projections were listing the Big 12 at like 50. But some of this too is like, all right, is that just tier one? Is that including your tier three? Is that including the playoff payout, or is this like just TV? The numbers can look wildly different based on how they are reported and sent out there. The total team payout per year is a different thing than what actually just comes from TV and your actual media rights. So I'm not sure which one that is. I'm not sure when it was the Navigate numbers, if those were everything included, lumped into one. I'm honestly not 100% sure about that. So just in the interest of full disclosure there, I do not 100% know. But here is a quote from one Big 12 AD. It says, quote, "The numbers look like they favor us," one Big 12 AD says. "Not by a huge amount. This is not like comparing Texas to Texas State, but there seems to be a noticeable difference." Then it says the Big 12 continues to be engaged with both Fox and ESPN for its new rights deal, which will begin in 2025. And that was under the headline, like the heading in the article, that the Big 12 is still moving in the right direction. So Dennis Dodd's reports continue to be pushing toward, hey, the Big 12 is in a pretty good spot with what its TV deal is going to be, which that I think is, one, obviously encouraging. You can take Dodd's reporting with a grain of salt if you want, but that's been a pretty consistent message, and we've seen that message of optimism pushed in a lot of different places. And so I think that's a part of what's fueling the Big 12 fans' optimism right now about the potential TV deal coming up here. The Pac-12 is obviously up first, and this is what really puts a lot of wind in Big 12 fan sails, being like, hey, you guys, there's no way you're going to get as much as we are, because right now we're hearing all the right things from this. Doesn't mean that when it comes down to it, that will actually be the case. But I don't know. To me, we've heard enough for me to think that, like, at worst, they're going to be on pretty equal ground here, the Big 12 and the Pac-12. So, again, I try to give you guys, when I give you these updates, like, as much of a I try to tell you, like, take all this with a grain of salt. There are a lot of reports. I try to give you at least my opinion on, like, how legitimate this is, how legitimate the reporter is, what the track record has been. And, like, for Dodd, some of this has been up and down a little bit in terms of what he has reported. Like, starting out, the Big 12 has no interest in going after Pac-12 schools. Then a week later was the Big 12 had plenty of interest. Those are things that have happened. And if you follow really anybody closely who's reporting on realignment, and Wilner and Canzano are a part of this, things will just change, because that's how it goes. A lot we have learned that when things are really happening, USC, UCLA, Texas, Oklahoma, nobody talks, nobody leaks, nothing gets out there until the very last minute. So nobody is necessarily being truthful here, and they can try and control the narrative by spinning whatever yarn they want to when they're talking to reporters. So I think that's natural to happen. And because of that, you do have to take this somewhat with a grain of salt. But when we see over and over again, like, fairly optimistic projections about the Big 12 TV deal, it I think turns into a, hey, where there's smoke, there's fire sort of a thing. But yes, fair to question, if he's talking to Big 12 ADs, which he is here, then we have to levy the same kind of like, hey, be careful with this, just like we would say, be careful with John Canzano reporting only about talking to Pac-12 athletic directors, who very well could be working a bunch of things behind the scenes while then putting on a nice public front when they're talking to somebody and being like, hey, no, everything's good, we're great, when really there are a lot of frantic phone calls being made behind the scenes. That's what we saw last year in the Big 12. So we know that's the reality. But that is an update from Dodd. There was also this, and this is the thing that I think can launch us into the second part of the discussion. It says Big Ten interest is cooled in Pac-12 teams. After the anxiety caused last week regarding further Big Ten expansion, industry sources indicate the Big Ten is no longer as interested in adding Cal, Oregon, Stanford, and Washington. Rights holders were balking at paying the same amount for those schools as the 16 Big Ten schools going forward, 80 to 100 million in total revenue. While those four programs may eventually have options, the Big Ten is concentrating on its new deal in 2023 while trying to lure Notre Dame, which has an open invitation. More and more stakeholders now believe the Fighting Irish will ultimately stay independent. Yeah, I've not seen really one single person who would go against that it really feels like Notre Dame is going to stay independent at this point. And in fact, one of the reports that we're going to get to from Canzano is that the number Notre Dame's looking for is like around $75 to $78 million, and that they are likely to get that from NBC to keep them from jumping to a conference. So, and it was with the sentiment, hey, wouldn't that be great? It'll slow down everything going on right now, and the Big 12 and the Pac-12 can both thrive. Yes, that would be great. That would be awesome. A part of the issue here is it feels like in the end, neither of these conferences, it can't be that both of these conferences survive, and thus the animosity there. So I understand a point, and I got an email about this, like, hey, chill with the vitriol. Can we recognize that it would be best if both conferences survive and thrive? Yes, I would love that. I would love it if we could guarantee that all five power conferences will stay in place. There will be no more realignment. Everybody will just stay and thrive. But to me, I think the reality is that's not going to happen. And that's why you have such a war going on right now between the Big 12 and the Pac-12, because people realize there can only be one. And in the end, 10, 15 years from now, there's probably only going to be one of the Big 12, Pac-12, or ACC left, some kind of conglomerate mashup of the three. So anyway, I'll let that set the stage for right now. Get to a couple donations here. If you want to donate and make sure your question or comment gets onto the chat tonight, click the $ below the chat box where it says say something to weigh in. Mexican Medic. What's up, Mexican Medic? Mexican Medic says, thank you for the donation, first of all. With a lackluster showing of the Pac-12 over the past couple of years in reference to football. With a lackluster showing of the Pac-12, I'm assuming this is over the last couple of years. With a lackluster showing of the Pac-12 over the last couple of years in reference to football, could any school in the Pac-12 bring anything to the table money-wise to the Big 12 at this point? Yeah, I've said this a lot. I don't think the play to add the four corner schools from the Pac-12 is about money. I think it's about survival. It kind of goes along with what I just said to lead into this. It's about strength in numbers and killing your enemy. Eventually, you're going to have the Big Ten, you're going to have the SEC, and then you will probably have, I would imagine, one group of like the next level, the next tier, and you're hoping to be that league. It's a fight for third. I think everybody's pretty much in agreement with that. For the ACC, the Pac-12, and the Big 12, it is a race for third right now. And so you would be gaining a lot in terms of the race for third, which eventually, long-term, just gives you a better chance of survival, which does, I guess, in turn mean more money. But, it would be like the only money potentially that's out there. So for your survival's sake, that's where the advantage is, not necessarily that you're going to make more money. Frankly, I don't think any of the four corner schools would add monetary value per school right now if they were added to the Big 12. I just don't think that's the reality. So therefore, you're doing it to kill your enemy. Kill or be killed. That was the first reaction that I had when we initially saw that this was going down with USC and UCLA. Go out there, see if you can land somebody, kill or be killed. Jake, thank you for the donation. Jake Anderegg says, if Arizona ultimately jumps to the Big 12, how does that affect the remaining Pac-9? Well, it wouldn't help. I think any way that you can throw like some turmoil in there and get ideas rattling around in people's brains about, hey, this may be an unstable ship, I think that's going to be a good thing. I think that forces the Pac-12 into expansion, assuming that they don't lose anybody else. And also, a part of it, frankly, would be assuming that they don't lose San Diego State as well. Like if Arizona comes, is the Big 12 just going to take San Diego State and try and chip away and deliver a shot there? Maybe. I don't think that has to happen, as people have pointed out to me. It doesn't, we don't need to be obsessed with a round number here. I don't think that would have to happen that way. You would take Arizona over taking nobody because you can't get a round number, for instance, right? You want to create as much instability and just get doubts creeping into people's minds. And if somebody does actually take the jump, then it becomes no longer hypotheticals and people sitting around meeting rooms talking about what they did or what they're going to do. There was action actually taken by somebody. And so if Arizona takes that step, yes, I think that will absolutely affect the stability of the Pac-12 there. But right now, I mean, to be honest, it is because we're out of the negotiating window for the Pac-12. There's debate on whether or not that has been extended behind closed doors, and we don't know about that or not. Regardless, it's going to be a little while before the Pac-12 gets their official numbers. I'm sure no matter what, with the negotiating window, they're going to get to the open market. I think that's just smarter business to get there and have multiple people bidding on it, not just ESPN and Fox. And we've seen reports that they want like Apple and Amazon to get into the fray here too. So it'll be a while before we really know what that number is going to look like for the Pac-12, which means for the time being, I would guess everybody's going to stand down. Arizona's still the closest to leave, but it feels like everything is standing down for the moment. So appreciate the donation there, Jake. Let me get somebody out of the chat here. There's a report. Okay. Pick up a donation here from Christian. Christian in before the new dating bot. Yeah, thank you, new dating bot. How much stock can we put into early commits when there are so many decommits happening lately? Well, I'm going to guess that you are here. You know what, Robbie, I see you asking to be a mod. We did talk about that. You're a mod, Robbie. So get rid of the bots. Get rid of the bots, Robbie. Let me go back to this question here. Yeah, decommits. I would imagine you're a K-State fan. K-State fans are dealing with that right now from Dylan Edwards, who just committed to Notre Dame. I don't think it's really like something that's picked up in terms of, I think that's been fairly common. I mean, I guess in this era with transfer portal, NIL, especially with these guys that are coming out of high school right now, NIL affects that and is going to have wandering eyes more. But I don't think that's really what this was about, NIL. I think it's just about prestige and recruiting attention. And I frankly think it happens a lot. And we just, as K-State fans, haven't known about it much because K-State has not recruited very high-profile athletes that deal with a bunch of high-profile offers and bounce around. So, yeah, I mean, look, is there less value in a commitment today than there was 10 years ago? Yeah, sure, absolutely. But I don't think it's changed like hyper recently or anything like that. I think that's just a reality. And look, it's a good thing. This is what I try to, comfort K-State fans a little bit with this. Like if you have kids that are being offered by Notre Dame and you're losing commitments to Notre Dame, well, it means you're in on higher profile kids and better kids than you were before. And you're going to win some of those battles, like when K-State won the battle for Avery Johnson at quarterback. So you just have to deal with it. It is a part of life in college football these days. All right, if you want to be a part of the chat tonight, get your question or comment on, you can do so by clicking the $ below the chat box where it says say something. That is how you get your question or comment. It will tack it up to the top for me and cut through everything else in the chat and make sure that I see it and supports the work that I'm doing here to bring you Big 12 content every single week as we barrel toward actual football season. Okay, now I mentioned the Big Ten interest, according to Dennis Dodd, has cooled in the Pac-12 schools for right now, which I think was becoming fairly obvious anyway. I think the specific reporting about the schools that were there and Kevin Warren kind of leaving the door open at Big Ten Media Days probably took on more of a life than he expected it to. I would imagine in retrospect that Warren probably thought like, well, yeah, I mean, of course, we're going to sit here and always be thinking about what's best for our conference. And there are schools that would be on our radar for that. Doesn't mean that we're going to do it right now, but there will always be schools on our radar, much like I used to always hear, like John Curry, when he was the athletic director at K-State, like athletic directors always have a working list to replace a head coach. They have all these head coaches. They're going to have a working list at all times to replace a head coach because they know they may need it. Like that's just preparation that you need to do. And I think the same principle would apply here. I think it would be a very similar sort of thing. That you're going to have a list of schools, if you're the Big Ten, at all times that you think could add value if and when the time actually comes to make that happen. But I doubt that Kevin Warren was sitting there thinking like this is going to be something imminent. I would guess that there was kind of a gasp from the Big Ten at the reaction through the rest of the college football world to those comments, being like, man, things are already so unstable. People are already really antsy about this, worried about their future. As we very well know here in Big 12 country, that's going to lead to some lashing out and some fear and some anxiety and some panic. Panic really probably being the operative word there. And so you might back off some of it now, leak something to a reporter and be like, hey, chill. We actually weren't quite that excited about doing it right now. Like, you guys don't need to freak out. That would be my guess as to what's happened now. But it also means that things probably are going to chill for a little while. And if that is the case, even if it's just a couple of months here while the Pac-12 gets its TV stuff sorted out, maybe we can bury the hatchet with the Pac-12 a little bit, because I am frankly getting a little bit exhausted with it. Here was the latest tweet that we had from John Wilner. This was on Friday. And this is the one that I saw where I think I quote tweeted it and said, like, is someone keeping track of how many tweets we've had this week from Canzano, Wilner, and Mandel, but primarily the former two there about the Big 12? Like, how many have come out strictly about the Big 12? This one said, one of my absolute favorite parts of realignment Twitter is when fans of the Big 12, which just added 4 group of fives to survive, roast the Pac-12 for being a group of 5. Simply spectacular. Okay, I mean, I'm not monitoring every single fan that's in the mentions of John Wilner right now, so I can't speak to specifically what people are saying. Obviously, I think there is some level of exaggeration if you're calling the Pac-12 a group of 5 conference, but it's not an exaggeration to say that the 4 group of 5 schools that the Big 12 just added have performed better than virtually the entire Pac-12 over the last 5 to 10 years. 5 years in particular, if we want to cut it off at 5, like when UCF had their big run back in 2017. I mean, these schools have been just as good, if not better, than basically everybody in that time span. So there is more truth to it than perhaps Wilner would like to admit there. And this is just a comment where you're fed up with people in your mentions and you're just throwing a barb to throw a barb. There's no real purpose to that. And so as much as like it's just turned into this battle, and this is all I see in my mentions, like you guys all fight in my mentions on Twitter. I've got to like mute conversations to keep it from continuing to fill up my mentions. But everything I see on both sides is it's like, oh, you're obsessed with me, rent free. It's just devolved into one of those arguments where one side says the other won't stop talking about them, and the other side says, oh, well, you won't stop talking about me. And here we are. There was also a Canzano story that came out the same day where his lead in the story was, quote, I don't have time nor attention for the Big 12 noise. And I guess really the lead in the tease on Twitter was, I don't have time nor attention for the Big 12 noise. And that was supposedly from a Pac-12 athletic director. So it was like, we were getting hit from all sides by this same sort of sentiment from the Pac-12, again, going out of their way to specifically discuss the Big 12, whether it's in writing, like in actual pieces, or whether it's on social media. So it's now the other side. It may have started with the Big 12 really charging after Pac-12 and Pac-12 media members and all of that. But now it's turned into the Pac-12 doing the same thing back and going out of their way to take shots or address the Big 12 when perhaps they don't really need to. If the reality is, like Canzano's reporting has suggested here recently, that the only real threat is the Big 10, it's not the Big 12, then why are there continuously articles quoting things about the Big 12 and tweets going after people in the Big 12? If it didn't matter, if it wasn't a thing, why would you waste the time and energy? And so that's kind of where I'm at. Like, we're both in this spot where everybody's so dug in, and I feel like we've almost even lost sight of where this whole thing started. You get into an argument, and at some point, you're just like, what? How did all this start? Like, why do we hate each other? Why are we fighting? I mean, obviously, I still understand the parameters. I understand why we're here. But I think the Big 12 came with more vitriol than most would be expected toward the Pac-12 media mafia, the Pac-12 propaganda machine, whatever it is that you want to call them. I think that all started because of last year, how the Pac-12 and Pac-12 media and all media in college football reacted to the Big 12, which was not much sympathy. And just, well, bygones be bygones. See you later. You're not going to survive. And then this year, much more of a groundswell of like, well, we have to save the Pac-12. Look at all this XYZ that's good about the Pac-12. And I say it all the time. The Big 12 comes by that sort of skepticism, honestly. So I understand why it happens. But now we've reached the point where the other side has overcorrected to where everybody is just in the middle, fighting, yelling, screaming, and we've lost sight of what the reality actually is. Okay, so I hope that is the peak. I mean, we've now had the Big 12 official Twitter account respond and quote tweeted Sean Wilner tweet We've now had John Wilner and John Canzano team up to do a podcast, okay, because I guess they're, brothers in arms against the Big 12 at this point. So I hope that is the peak, because there was another tweet that I saw from Wilner a couple of days ago that I think is the actual reality of the situation and what kind of gets lost in all this, with everybody fighting back and forth. And it says, competitively and financially, the new Pac-12, new Big 12, and ACC are much more like each other with differences on the margins than any of them is like the SEC and Big 10, which has been my point since June 30th. Take away the last sentence. If you're just saying competitively and financially, the new Pac-12, new Big 12, and ACC are much more like each other than they're like the SEC and Big 10, with just some slight differences on the margins, 100% agree with that. I don't disagree with that at all. Like, anybody, I think, with a brain in college football understands right now the SEC and the Big 10 are just taking off like a rocket. They're going to leave everybody else in the dust. All three of those leagues have their specific problems. The Pac-12, how are you going to get your best brands to sign up when they know they're still somewhat coveted by the Big 10 and may jump? The Big 12, are you going to be able to make enough money to survive long term? Are you going to be able to make enough money to entice teams to come from the Big 12 or from the Pac-12? But fairly stable ground right now, because it doesn't look like you're going to get plucked. But if you're not having teams that are desired by other leagues, will that be enough to survive long term? And then the ACC, of course, the issue there is the grant of rights and their struggles outside of Clemson. Florida State, Miami have been down. Is there anybody outside of Clemson and Clemson who had a down year last year? Are they going to be able to rebound after losing their athletic director, offensive coordinator, and defensive coordinator? We shall see. All three of those leagues have their problems. All three are going to be woefully behind financially the Big Two. That's very true. And if that really were the sentiment that was being projected this whole time from Pac-12 country, I don't think we would have much of an issue. But the problem is, when he says, which has been my point since June 30th, okay, but the tone has changed on that. And that's where I say, we lost sight of this. There were so many Big 12 fans coming in the mentions that it turned into just your natural response. And again, I understand how this happens. It's been more adversarial and more a tone of putting down the league, putting down those schools, going out of your way to find things to devalue that league. And I feel like when you do that, everybody's assumption is, well, you're trying to say that the Pac-12 is much better. I would say that the tone that has come from those in the Pac-12 here recently has suggested that they think the Pac-12 is, in fact, actually much better and different than the Big 12 in that respect, when really they all are in pretty similar positions. That's why it's been so frustrating. It feels like we all kind of do agree on that general point. Maybe I'm sure there are some Big 12 fans out there that get a little carried away and think the Big 12 is emphatically worth more than the Pac-12 at this point. We know the Big 12 has been emphatically better, even the schools just in the new Big 12, emphatically better than the Pac-12 on the field in the last 5 years, maybe even 5 to 10 if you want to stretch it out to that. That we know, and you can be emphatic about that, but we're talking about survival here, and that means you've got to worry about brands and TV value and all that stuff. But I still think it's very close, and the ACC has a ton of problems themselves, lots of issues, and everybody is kind of in the same boat. So I agree with that, and that's where I'm like, look, can we bury the hatchet? If we can all agree and kind of be there on that level, then I'm here for just chilling for a little while. Let's see what happens. Wait until we get some Pac-12 numbers that come out, see if they can get anybody to sign a grant of rights, and then sort of go from there. Sounds like the Big Ten standing down for now. Sounds like Notre Dame's going to get what they want from NBC and probably not make a jump to a conference right now. That should calm the waters for a little while. Let's go play some football where we know the Big 12 is going to have a better season than the Pac-12, because that's how it always goes. Reminder, Cincinnati made the college football playoff last year. That has not happened for the Pac-12 since 2016. Okay, 2016. Thanks to Jeffrey Fuller, we had the computer numbers every single week last week to track just how much the Big 12 was dominating on the field last year. So let's take solace in that. Wait for the season to get here. Let's actually see some football happen. And I think we'll all feel a little bit better. We're in the dog days of summer. Everybody's chomping at the bit for football. Everybody still does have lingering anxiety about their survival. That is true when Big 12 or Pac-12 fans rather want to poke fun at hey, I mean, the Big 12, you're all scared for survival, just like the rest of us. That's where this comes from. I think that's where some of it comes from. That's a piece of it that is definitely there. That's true. And because of that, we're just angsty at all times here, looking for an enemy. And it's been easy to find in the Pac-12, especially with some of the snark coming from the Pac-12 reporting. But maybe we can all start to move on a little bit, and maybe we'll start to get more football preview stories, and this will distance itself for the moment. We shall see. Calico Willie, thank you for the donation, Calico Willie. He says, "Hey, John, with football season just a few short weeks away, are we expecting to see expansion talks to fall back a little bit?" Wow, what an appropriate question. I didn't even know that was coming. Okay. With football season just a few short weeks away, are we expecting to see expansion talks fall back a little bit? I actually read John Wilner's latest mailbag. He got asked a very similar question from a Pac-12 fan, and Wilner said, "I actually think we'll have a resolution in the short term to all this fairly soon because we'll get the Big Ten TV deal within the next couple of weeks, which will then move into, all right, the Pac-12 is next up. Everybody, we're out of that exclusive negotiating window. It will be put out to bid for everybody else. And that by the time we're in early football season, we may actually know what the Pac-12 TV deal would be. And then that comes down to, will you get Oregon, Washington, Stanford, Cal to sign away their grant of rights? And there will be some dominoes that start to fall there. So I would imagine we will still hear about it, but I do think that right now it will cool a bit in terms of like the talk. And again, this is one thing that frustrated me too, a suggestion that I saw over the weekend that it's all, randos with Twitter accounts that have been fueling like, hey, the Big 12 could legitimately add Pac-12 schools. No, that was reported by CBS Sports, The Athletic. That was not something that Big 12 fans just totally made up. But I think that talk is going to die down for now because everybody's realizing, again, something I have said this whole time constantly, and that is we're going to have to wait until the Pac-12 officially gets these TV numbers. Once you got past the initial wave of shock and nobody was willing to jump right then, yeah, of course, you're going to have to wait until they see the specific financials. That report we referenced earlier from Dodd said they're pretty close. So the Big 12 slightly ahead, but they're pretty close. I mean, if that's the reality, it's going to be a tough decision for anybody from the Pac-12. Do you think that long-term stability in the Big 12 is A, that much more attainable there in that league, and B, worth making a jump for just a little bit of money? Those are tough, difficult decisions that will take some time. So I guess my answer to your question, Calico, would be yes and no. I think, yes, it will fade a little bit for right now because I don't think there will be any significant news to this for at least a couple of weeks. And then no, because I think we will still get little bits of information trickling out about it. And it's a big enough deal that they can't just punt on it during football season. So I think because of that, yes and no, we will continue to hear some of it. But it certainly won't be as hot and heavy as it has been, for the last month and a half since that first broke about USC and UCLA. Reminder, if you want to hop in tonight on the chat, get your question or comment read on the show, you can do so by clicking the $ below the chat box where it says say something. That is how you do that. Tax it up at the top, gets in front of everybody else, and ensures that you make it on the show. Also, haven't mentioned this yet. If you could, please click like on the video. It's free. Doesn't cost you anything. That's a way to support the channel and support me bringing you Big 12 content week in and week out. Helps me with the YouTube algorithm, all that good stuff. So please do go like the video if you don't mind. Grandan says, since the lawyers who work the deals are sworn to confidentiality, who are the reliable sources for realignment? Well, it's a valid point that you bring up. There are no like ironclad, real great sources for it necessarily. I mean, it's kind of a loaded question because we've had in the last real big round of realignment in 2010. I'm considering this round the last 2 years combined, like Texas, Oklahoma, USC, UCLA in the same round. If we go to the round before that, we did have, Chip Brown from Orange Bloods was a great source there for a while. And I know that the Texas and Oklahoma, everybody to the Pac-12 didn't wind up happening, but it was close. And it was because Chip Brown was being like spoon-fed information at Texas by somebody. And I've heard some of the details of how that was going on. Like he really was a very reliable source for them to get their message out when they wanted a particular message to get out. So you will find characters, I think, that are more reliable than others, that are more tied in than others. But again, the idea there was like Texas was using him to get out the message that they wanted to get out. So everybody right now is kind of a pawn, which is supposed to be sort of the opposite of reporting, right? You find out the real truth. But it's been proven now with two massive, earth-shattering college football stories, as big as any college football story that's existed like in the history of the sport. Texas and Oklahoma to the SEC, USC, UCLA to the Big Ten. They were kept totally under lock and key, ironclad. Wilner reported USC and UCLA at the very last minute when it was done. I mean, basically wrapped up and done. And the only reason we found out about Texas and Oklahoma was because Texas A&M found out about it and decided to blabber about it at the 11th hour. Maybe not totally done, but like at the 11th hour. They were able to keep those things under lock and key, even with great reporters in Austin and a lot of boosters who love to talk at Texas. And that is like the singular thing that will always signify to me we will never know with things of this import, like this high on the list of importance. We're not going to know the ultimate reality on these things because people just aren't talking. Even the normal like relationships that people would have with reporters, they're not talking about the whole truth, and they want to. This is a valuable tool to be able to control narratives right now. We in the Big 12 know how much narratives can help or hurt you. So everybody else isn't stupid. They understand that. Administrators, they understand that. So they can spoon feed whatever info they want to help formulate a narrative that they want and what's really happening in those closed door meetings. There was a really good article in The Athletic, and I only got through about half of it. I need to finish it. But it was about how all this stuff kind of goes down. And I want to say, what they say, like 5 people maybe knew about the USC thing at USC. Like they kept it to that small a group of people that were in like the closed door meetings before, until they had to like tell their social media team, like, hey, be ready to get this going. And that was at the last minute when Wilner did finally report it. So we've just seen over and over again with these massive realignment things that they're the real meat is kept under pretty good lock and key. Now, if the Big 12 were to get like some concrete number back from Fox and it's very favorable, I'm just using this as an example, but it's really favorable, then yes, if they were to leak it to somebody like a Dennis Dodd, you could say, well, hey, I mean, that's true. It's going to be very true. But the reason it would be leaked is because they know that'll help the narrative. It'll be great for the Big 12 if that gets out there. So you see, there's just all these different motives at play, like in this whole game. And I'm speaking out of turn a little bit because even when I've spent 10 years in the industry, like I was not reporting was not the main focus of what I was doing. I was hosting a talk show. I was covering events. I was doing play-by-play. I wore like 17 different hats. So I was not like these guys where like reporting is just their jam. So there's probably more intricacy and nuance to it than I even know. But based on what I know, it's hard to totally trust anybody. Valid point. Which may render everything that we're doing here useless, but damn it, it's entertaining. We love college football. We love talking about it, right? So we're going to scoop up any more so we can possibly get. Let me move on here to another donation. I'm a little bit behind. Where did Robert go? Robert, thank you for the donation. Robert says, Wilner, doth protest too much, methinks. Shakespeare. Keep up the good work, John. Wreckham. Thank you, Robert. Wilner's getting a little, just getting a little snarky. I think that is, if anybody ever questions whether or not the Big 12 is elite at Twitter, like Big 12 fan bases are elite on Twitter, have that kind of passion. And I'm talking about new Big 12 in this too, because Lord knows, BYU Twitter, man, you guys bring it strong. Big 12 Twitter is pretty elite. And the fact that John Wilner, who is like hardened, longtime reporter, very straightforward kind of guy. And I've told you guys many times before, much as I get frustrated with him, I have a lot of respect for him and the reporting acumen that he has and the career that he's had. You guys have cracked him. Like you cracked him to the point where he is having to pop off with shots on Twitter on a fairly regular basis. And that's because of the passion of Big 12 fans. Passion and, maybe being, what's the word? Not shy. Not very shy about voicing your opinion. We'll put it that way. That'll be the way that I market that. Big 12 fans have not been shy. So yeah, you are spot on there. I think that quote does apply, but it's all come because of the passion of Big 12 fans basically getting under his skin. Understandable, by the way. Understandable. Happens to me all the time. All you got to do is follow me on Twitter for a day. You'll see that's what happens on Twitter. Okay. Broderick, thank you for the donation, Broderick. Broderick says, where do you think the Big 12's annual per team payout will be? I'm thinking 30 to 35 million is to be expected. Yeah, Broderick, it feels like a fool's errand to totally project that right now. But if we're going by the Dennis Dodd article that I began the show reading to you from, that was in that range. It said north of $30 million and slightly ahead of the Pac-12. So again, if that is just like the tier 1 and tier 2 media, 30 to 35 million, that's pretty good, because then you got to factor in college football playoff payout and whatever you're going to get from tier 3, however that's going to work with the new Big 12. That'll add some extra money on top of it. So then you're probably talking about north of 40, I would think, at the end of the day in terms of your overall team payout. And that'll be okay. You certainly would like it to be better, but that would be okay. And I think stomachable when at one point in time it was talked about like, how is the Big 12 going to hit like 10? That was hence like the Stuart Mandel piece from last year that stayed pinned for a long time. That was when those discussions were happening. So yeah, I think that's a pretty good conservative-ish guesstimate right now, if you wanted to go with that. But there are just so many factors here. Again, one of those being that Brett Yormark's been on the job for less than a week, right? Tomorrow will mark a week on the job for Brett Yormark. And what is he going to be able to conjure up for this league? I think that's another wild card that we just don't know the answer to right now. Joe, I appreciate the donation and the support as always. Thank you. Very generous of you. Joe says, I agree. A lot of this stuff will be tabled until next year. Yeah, I think like big movement. I think it feels like, and again, I hate making statements like this in a realignment world, but it feels like the major moves are done for a while. I would love for the Big 12 to still be able to raid the Pac-12. It just feels like the timeline on the TV contract, even getting official bids back and then taking that back to the table and having meetings and discussing that with Oregon and Washington and Stanford and Cal and what are they going to do. Then there's probably some time where they need to like weigh their options after that. I mean, that feels like a timeline that especially interspersed with not just football season, but the fall athletic season where there's going to be more on the plates of all these people, that will probably bog it down some. Then I think we're at least like months away from a major domino falling or something big happening there, especially when Notre Dame, which is the one that could really change everything. And I think it's been appropriately characterized in the articles that I'm reading right now that like that's the thing that if you're talking about college football stability, it's been wobbly, right? We started to feel like after UCLA, USC, and then the comments of Kevin Warren at media days, like maybe this thing isn't done. Like this thing really could. We could get to the AFC, NFC, NFL sort of model here just like that. I think if the Big Ten gets Notre Dame and they decide to make that jump, we're right back into that discussion. If they don't and they sign on with NBC for a long time, then we're looking at waiting. We're looking at a waiting game there for a little while. So that's kind of to me, taking the temperature of this whole thing right now. That's what I'm feeling like. But appreciate the donation and the comment there, Joe. What's up, Bob? Thank you for the donation, Bob. Bob Holsey in the house. He says, I think the Big 12 needs to get valuations on each pack in Big 12 schools plus San Diego State and USF. Have the experts decide what combination pays out the best. Well, rest assured, I think they're doing that. You know, I mean, we heard last year when the Big 12 was in the midst of adding the 4 schools that they did, there were reports that the Big 12 was told by their media consultants that BYU was the only school that would actually add value to the TV contracts, whereas the others may be just more strength in numbers kind of a thing as opposed to adding a ton of value. Now, whether or not that actually will be true in the end, who knows? But that was at least like a report that would indicate that work is being done behind the scenes. And again, let me go find the name of that company that I began reading to you about that Mark Shapiro was with. Endeavor. Endeavor is the consulting firm that the Big 12 is working with right now. And I think through that and the fact that Dodd also reported the Big 12 is in constant communication right now with ESPN and Fox, I think they're getting those numbers and that information right now behind the scenes. I'm sure that they have it. In fact, yeah, like I would guess that they've had it, not or getting it or whatever. I think they probably had that at this point. So those are the kinds of things that I think happen behind the scenes. And that's the type of information, again, that we don't get when someone asks, like, who can we really trust on this? It would be awesome if there were a reporter that were like able to get that information from behind those closed doors meetings, but that's the kind of stuff that's not really leaking out much right now. Viewer X1. Where did Viewer X1 go? Here we go. Viewer X1, thank you for the donation. Viewer X1 says, if the Big Ten is going to eventually raid the pack, is the answer to set the trap by taking their buffers now? If the Big 12 takes San Diego State and Boise away, I continue to say, at least San Diego State for sure. If you can add Arizona and San Diego State, I see the case there to go ahead and take an expansion option away from the Pac-12. But a part of that is, I mean, look, the Pac-12 is going to hinge on what Oregon, Washington, Cal, and Stanford do long-term. And if they're going to the Big Ten, it doesn't matter if they have San Diego State or not, that league is going to fold. And if they stick around, San Diego State may help them a little bit. Maybe, in 10 years, they could really develop into something that becomes, I have all the respect in the world for San Diego State. But I think it would be a small step towards destabilizing the Pac-12. I don't think it would be some sort of kill shot if the Big 12 were to grab San Diego State, because it's all going to be about those top 4 brands and what they decide to do long-term. That's what's going to make or break the fate of the Pac-12. And then Boise, it's hard for me to tell where Boise is actually at in terms of the interest level of the Pac-12. In fact, I saw Wilner rank his top 3 Mountain West schools, and it was San Diego State 1, Fresno 2, and I forget who was 3, but there was no mention in his little blurb where he had been asked about expansion candidates about Boise. It really feels like right now San Diego State and Fresno would be the top 2, and I definitely don't see the Big 12 messing around and getting involved with Fresno. So, like where your head's at, again, I say all the time and said earlier today, like kill or be killed. Do things that are going to harm your opponent here, and that would induce some harm. There's no doubt, because San Diego State is the slam dunk. If you read the Pac-12 reporting from Wilner and company, San Diego State is in a class of its own in terms of expansion candidate for the Pac-12. But really, if you took that from them, they could still survive as long as the top 4 brands stick around. That will be the key and the real kicker in all of that. Bud, thank you for the donation. Bud, always appreciate it. Bud is your man. If you're going to Lubbock, LubbockGuesthouse.com if you need a place to stay while you were in Lubbock. And also here, if you're wanting to go watch the season opener, September 3rd for the Texas Tech Red Raiders when they play Murray State, you can get the house and 4 tickets for $600. Now that sounds like a pretty damn good deal. If you're looking for a place to stay for the weekend in town for the game in Lubbock and get your 4 tickets, have it all taken care of, get in contact with Bud, LubbockGuesthouse.com. That is the way to do that. Appreciate you there hopping in, Bud. And thank you for the reminder that football season is that close. That sounds like a heck of a way to do it. And you can watch the debut of Joey McGuire, man, one of the most talked about new coaches in the country because of what he's doing on the recruiting trail right now for Texas Tech. You can go see his debut there in beautiful Lubbock, Texas. Thank you, Bud, for the donation. Always appreciate your support, my friend. And let's run it up there. LubbockGuesthouse.com. I know I got a lot of Tech fans in here. I know I got a lot of Tech fans that follow here. There's your hookup for the weekend. All Blue 12. All Blue 12. If anything, I've loved how this has solidified the new Big 12 together. I've enjoyed the relationships I've made already. Great job on the channel. Thank you, All Blue 12, BYU fan there. And I think you are correct. This has been used against the Big 12 by the Pac-12 media conglomerate, and I understand why, saying, look, your perceived strength right now is in the fact that nobody wants anybody that's in your league. True. That is true, but it is actually a strength and something of value right now because it gives you longer-term stability. And it's not like the teams that are there are bad. This is not a league that cannot compete for a spot in the 12-team playoff or 2 spots in a 12-team playoff if we wind up getting that, if that rolls around, right? Not about the strength of the league, but you have fan bases that really care and teams that are good here. And it is a strength that nobody seems to be going anywhere right now. You can build camaraderie in this league unlike anywhere else. I even just heard today, I happen to be watching a little bit of something on LSU recruiting where they were going after a kid with Florida State, and Florida State, it was leaked out there like Florida State was telling the kid, we're going to be in the SEC by 2025 anyway. So like Florida State's out here apparently is a recruiting tactic using like, we're going to be in the SEC long-term anyway. So the ACC, like how can you feel stable with that? Even with your dumb 12-year grant of rights that's still up there, right? You cannot build that kind of togetherness and stability in that conference for sure, because Florida State, Miami, Clemson, they're looking around like, hey man, we got to get somewhere bigger and better. Same story, obviously, with the Pac-12, the top 4 brands, looking at the Big Ten. There's so much instability in those leagues. And we're sitting here in Big 12 country where even Kansas, who was a school that had the thirstiest wandering eye there for a long time, has now resigned itself to like, we just need to be here and make this league as strong as we can. So there is value to that, as the Big 12 has seen over the years how much value there can be because they've been the total opposite, not together and on the same page. So yes, there are definitely some advantages there. Let's see. Feel like I missed one. Nope. Here we go. G. David Davis. Thank you for the donation. G. David Davis says, why can't Big 12 schools lash themselves together with the ACC except with rolling ties to figure out short-term media contracts? Don't sign on, then get out. All right, let me make sure I'm following this here. Why can't Big 12 schools lash themselves together like the ACC except with rolling the future short-term media contracts? I'm unclear. I hope I'm understanding this correctly, David. I would guess that you're saying like sign up a grant of rights that is not as long as the ACC's there. And I think you're going to see that basically from everybody now. I don't think you're going to like long gone are the days of anybody signing up for like a 10 to 12 year media contract. I mean, the ACC has been the cautionary tale on that, which At the time it was signed, I can understand the logic. It was like, hey, look at the Big 12 that had all these problems because their grant of rights was coming up and everybody knew like this was the time to go leave if you can. But what that wound up doing is getting away from the fact that that takes away your chance to like re-up your media value and crank up the money for everybody. And so they've got themselves into a pickle there. I think that, yeah, the wave of the future now is going to be you're going to have to sign short-term deals until we probably get to that point where there's the two behemoths and it's like literally just Fox and ESPN divisions of football. Then they'll probably have some long-term things signed when it all gets settled. But for now, I think you're going to continue to see very short contracts. Nobody's going to want to sign their rights away for very long. Glenn, I appreciate the donation. Glenn says, I grew up a USC fan, went to many of their games. I was also a big Pac-10 fan back then. It's really sad to see how they do business. Go BYU. Yeah, I mean, and sad, I feel like I will even stop you a little bit at sad. I feel like that's a little bit strong. I think maybe the whole situation is sad that we've kind of wound up here where it's turned into such a you-know-whating match between the two sides. And that's kind of what I was trying to talk about earlier. Like, it feels like some of this has been lost. We are more or less on the same page, feeling like these three schools are pretty similar and all falling behind the Big Two. And it's going to be a Big Two, Little Three sort of world right now, as long as the leagues can survive for the time being. And we have gotten too bogged down in the weeds and probably gotten too personal, frankly, in all of it from both sides. So in general, I think the situation, yes, is a little bit sad because as much as right now there has been ire towards the Pac-12, like in a vacuum, I don't want the Pac-12 to fail. I love every Power 5 conference in college football. I love the game the way that it has been. I don't want to lose any of that. I wish everybody still had equal access to, generally revenue, like being on a fairly even playing field as far as that goes. And it was kind of like the old days. Would love for the Pac-12 to succeed. Would love for the Big 12 to succeed. If we could go forever with the 5 Power 5 conferences, that would be great. It just unfortunately does not seem like the reality right now that we're actually headed toward, which is the unfortunate part of that. So, yeah, look, I'm trying to toe the line a little bit here because I feel like even my tone the last couple of weeks has not been fire and brimstone, let's go get these guys. I just try and point out what it is that I'm seeing here, which is that both sides have kind of devolved into this same battle. Everyone's being drugged through the mud. Here's a little bit more from Canzano and Wilner. And this is about your 10-minute warning. I'll give you about 5 to 10 more minutes here. If you want to get something in, you can donate by clicking the $ below the chat box where it says say something. That is how you hop into the chat here tonight. Also, like the video, please. If you have not, I would appreciate that. So here was a little bit more from Wilner that I thought was pretty revealing. He got asked, why should the so-called four corner school stay in the conference when Oregon, Washington, and Stanford will continue soliciting the Big Ten, even if there is a short-term grant of rights signed? And he says, Wilner, this is the added complication. The very reason the hotline views Pac-12 survival is merely a 4-point favorite over Pac-12 extinction. So, he's got it as a 4-point favorite to be the Pac-12 survives. That's not overwhelming. He says, were the calculation entirely about annual revenue, survival would be a substantial favorite. We believe Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado, and Utah would prefer to remain in the Pac-12, and there's no indication that either league has a significant edge in future revenue. But the long-haul stability issue certainly must be considered. Thank you, John. Thank you for finally considering it. It says the hotline does not believe the Big Ten will expand again this decade. It's a big statement. In our estimation, Notre Dame will sign a new deal with NBC and then remain independent, limiting the Big Ten's options. But admittedly, that's a precarious assumption for the four corner schools. At this point, the challenge for Commissioner George Glievkov is creating a contract that provides flexibility for Washington, Oregon, and Stanford and security for the others. That could be a 6 or 8 year deal with an opt-out clause in case the Big Ten comes calling. Why would the four corners agree? Well, Utah won't sign a 10 or 12-year deal with the Big 12, and we aren't sure Arizona State would either. Those schools want flexibility in case the long-anticipated FBS split unfolds and the call comes from the upper tier. The other issue is timing, and then, it kind of talks about the fact that they're negotiating right now and the Big 12 is not. I feel like that paragraph, again, back to like where we're more the same than we're different. That paragraph is basically what I've been saying. Like we can talk until we're blue in the face about who's going to make more money or if the Big 12 is worth more or whatever. But one of the big issues and keys here is, yes, why would any of those schools sign on long-term? And that was even bringing up not the powerful four that potentially have that Big Ten option sitting out there. That was talking about everybody else. Like, why would the four corner schools sign on if they're worried about what Oregon and Washington are going to do? And then he's bringing up, well, there would be an out clause for the Big Ten. Well, How's that going to make then the four corner schools feel about that? Would that push them back toward considering the Big 12 more? These are all the dynamics at play for the Pac 12 that they will have to worry about once they start getting concrete TV numbers in. And so that's what I've been screaming about. And this is where I feel like I get lumped into all of the Big 12, Pac 12 conversation and ranting and raving. And it's like, no, I've just pointed out that what's been underreported from the Pac 12 is there's so much focus on the numbers, TV wise and dollar signs. What about the actual reality of the Pac 12 situation and trying to get everybody to sign on the dotted line? I think that's been very much underreported by those in the Pac 12. That would be one actual, like, legitimate reporting criticism that I would levy. I feel like there's been a lot of focus on what is going on versus the Big 12 in terms of head to head. But it's not, this is not like, it's treated like it's created in a vacuum, and it's not. We're not in a vacuum. We're in a world where you have to deal with the trickiness of all those schools and trying to get them to sign on. Sergeant Pickles. What up, Sergeant Pickles? Thank you for the donation, Sergeant Pickles. He says the Pac-12 and the Big 12 both missed a chance to stay relevant by not combining the top 12 to 16 teams and later adding ACC teams. Both will eventually fade into the group of five. I would say that that's right and wrong, or at least that I agree and disagree with parts of it. I think the Pac-12 missed a chance to kill the Big 12. Absolutely. And in fact, let me tag on a little bit of reporting that I saw about that. I got to remember what part threw that onto my sheet here. That came from the Dennis Dodd article. It says, this is a Big 12 AD to Dennis Dodd. He said, quote, "We all would have jumped." One Big 12 AD told CBS Sports in reference to the Pac-12's interest in getting into Texas. Okay, so that's, now you can start cutting that down. These are Big 12 ADs in Texas. So TCU, Baylor, and I would imagine that's probably Chris Del Conte at TCU if I were going to speculate there, because TCU has been one of the schools speculated about the most in terms of Pac-12 interest last year. And hey, there it is. They would have jumped. And apparently the vote, this is reporting from Dennis Dodd, the Pac-12 vote last year was 8-4 against taking Big 12 schools. That's how close we were to, like, the Big 12 just being done, finito, finished. And that would have been good for the Pac-12's long-term survival. Where I kind of disagree with you is it's like, I mean, I feel like it's just an inevitability, you know, whether that had happened or not, eventually there's going to be a mashup of all three of those conferences. And will some of the schools get left out potentially? And would be like a third tier kind of a thing. Like I don't even want to start thinking about that, because you guys know the sign behind me, you know, I start to get worried about where that would fit into things. But I feel like we're headed toward that anyway, no matter what is going to happen with the Pac-12 and the Big 12 here. But that could be 10 years from now. So you're like fighting for the period of survival right now. You want to be the top dog right now and kill off one of your competitors right now, so that maybe you wind up being the place where that all happens. I guess if you're saying like, hey, I mean, the thing is, like, later adding ACC teams, it's just hard to know when that's going to be. I mean, we're talking about the Pac-12 and the Big 12 linking up, and then for like 10 years, you got to sit there and wait and bide your time for the ACC schools. I don't know. There's just a lot of unknowns with that. And I think at this point, we're just the toothpaste is out of the tube on those leagues linking up, because we've had Kliavkov now, like, kind of taking shots at Yormark, and the Big 12 Twitter account coming back at John Wilner. I don't know. There's just been a lot that's happened. It seems like those two sides would not be really willing to work with each other. And there was the ESPN story about the fact that was at least at one point discussed, and then they decided not to do anything with it. All right, I'm getting a little behind here. Let's try and sprint to the finish line, people. Juan, thank you for the donation, Juan. Love to see you in here. Glad that you were able to hop in here. Says, go Cougs. Any projections for Houston this year? You know, I need to do more research. I'll be honest. Like, I try to be honest, probably to a fault with you guys here on the channel. All my bandwidth has been conference realignment outside of a day job, trying to put together a social life, being in a relatively new city to me, moving not all that long ago here. And the day-to-day grind is tough to even keep up with everything going on with realignment. So I do not know a ton about what Houston has coming back this year football-wise, but I think Dana Holgerson is a pretty good coach. I think especially being in the position he's in now, I think he did pretty good things at West Virginia, but based on a lot of circumstance, expectations that were created by him, roster drop-off, like, it made sense for him to leave. I think he's a better coach than what West Virginia fans maybe thought by the end of it there. I still have a lot of respect for him. Houston is making a big commitment toward football, and they have a ton of momentum from last year. So I think Houston will be very competitive toward the top of the AAC for sure. Do I think that they're going to rip off what they did last year after that season opening loss to Texas Tech, I don't know. But I ordered a Phil Steele today, if that makes you feel better. So hopefully I'll know a little bit more about Houston specifically. And really appreciate the question. It's all I can do to try and keep up with realignment right now with what's going on. I hope everybody does understand that. So appreciate the support. Thank you for being here, Juan. And eventually, I swear to God, we will talk some more football at some point. Joe, thank you for the donation. Joe says, I was reading how NBC was looking at a huge contract with the Big Ten. Very generous donation. Once again, Joe, you've given a couple of those tonight, so I really do appreciate that sincerely. I know that NBC has been mentioned with the Big Ten because the latest article I saw really talking about that was there was speculation that, okay, Dennis Dodd at one point had said the Big 12 might be shoulder programming for Notre Dame. Like they would get involved with the Big 12 so you could pair a game either before or after a Notre Dame football game, which I was excited about. That would be great news for the Big 12. And then the latest thing I read was, well, maybe actually now that'll be Big 10. They'll just get involved with the Big 10 game and they'll stick some kind of Big 10 action either before or after Notre Dame and have that be their shoulder and lead-in content. And that maybe even that like helps start forming that relationship to eventually get Notre Dame to the Big 10 if you're going to be involved with their TV deal already there. So yes, I have seen some of that speculation. It would make sense. I mean, to me, it makes sense. Just with the base level knowledge that I have and just following this and all the reporting, I do think that would make some sense if NBC wanted to do that. Because look, the perception is reality. And again, all these big, like there's already a lot of crossover between where Notre Dame's at in Indiana and then Big Ten country. I'm sure they would love to be able to pair it. I'm sure they would much prefer to be able to pair a Big Ten game, even if it's like a third tier Big Ten game with their Notre Dame game, as opposed to a Big 12 game, just because of proximity, where they're at and how massive those fan bases are for all the schools in the Big Ten. All the reasons why the Big Ten has been able to position itself as one of the two big top dogs in college football, and the Big 12 has not. I think that is just the unfortunate reality there. All right. I think I'm pretty much through all the donations here. I didn't get to quite everything. Canzano quoted a Pac-12 AD, asked about the University of Arizona. Are they a candidate to be poached? And the AD said, quote, they are right there with us. So we're getting more of that type of reporting from Canzano right now, that everybody is in a unified front in terms of what they're saying publicly. There's also a blurb here from Canzano about Oregon and unequal revenue sharing. It said the Ducks need to continue to invest heavily in football and make the playoff in football. I'm told by Pac-12 sources an uneven distribution of bowl game revenue and units from the men's basketball NCAA tournament is on the table. Basically, if you win big in football and basketball, you get a bigger share of the proceeds generated by your success. So that could be a way to make the Oregon, Washington, Stanford cows of the world more happy. I still wonder about some of that, even from their standpoint, being like, well, hey, a lot of what we bring that is value is our brand, regardless of whether or not we're going to the playoff every single year. Our brand brings you the value. Why should we sign on to something that we have to earn when we basically already earned it by being who we are? That would be an interesting question, an interesting line, I think, to cross at some point there. Notre Dame, I told you that was another blurb from Canzano, mid $78 million per year, the number that they appear to be seeking from NBC. And it's really the main realignment updates there. That is really the main realignment updates. Those are the main realignment updates. Tired. I've been talking for a long time, an hour and 3 minutes here. Juan, thank you for the donation to cap this off, Juan, especially after I just wasn't able to answer your question. Very, very kind of you. Juan says, thanks for the honesty. What do you think happens with Big 12 realignment? Sorry if I missed your explanation. Go Cougs. Hey, go Cougs indeed. Somebody try to show. It's like the shocker kind of thing, right? For Houston. I'm very hesitant about doing that there. I got to get that one totally down, but I remember someone trying to tell me that. Yeah, realignment with the Big 12. I think the general tone here today, Juan, has been it doesn't feel like anything is going to happen really soon. Things have maybe cooled for the time being until we find out what's going to happen with the Pac-12 TV deal, which is going to be weeks to months. But guys like John Wilner do think that he did say he thinks we'll have a resolution by the end of the fall, at least in terms of like this hyper recent round of realignment right now, which he believes would be Notre Dame stays put, Big Ten stays put, Pac-12 stays put, basically kind of the status quo of where we're at right now, and then would move on from there. I still think the dynamics of that are probably trickier than he's making it out to be, and that there could still be some movement because of that. But then nothing's really going to happen until the Pac-12 gets back solid TV numbers. And so, we're out of the original freak out period where you could maybe get one of the four corner schools or multiple four corner schools to leave in the panic of USC and UCLA leaving. But that they've moved past that stage. I mean, I will say that much. The Pac-12 has gotten past that stage, which gives them a much better chance of staying stable for now. So I think that's basically where things sit for the Big 12. Don't think it's changed. That Arizona seemingly would be the most likely to leave if somebody were to, but I don't think you should expect that to happen anytime really, really soon. Okay. That's going to do it for me here. Man, I see Opie. You must be a horrible date. You can only talk 1 hour. Opie, how many dates have you been on where you talk for an hour straight with nothing else, man? I challenge you to go talk for an hour straight about one topic. No back and forth with anybody. No vibing off the other person's energy, getting to like rest, take a drink, anything like that. Go see how tough it is, man. People don't understand. Like, it is a skill. It is a skill. And I shouldn't do this like to try and toot my own horn. This goes for other radio hosts as well. Guys that are hosting like 4 hours every day, especially solo. That is unbelievably hard. It is unbelievably hard to keep up the energy and be able to like keep your head, like clear your head of thoughts, keep your head clear enough to be able to talk as I'm struggling to right now. So you get the idea. That is a skill that you got to develop. And I did it over 10 years of hosting a daily talk show. So listen, man, I'm doing okay in terms of being able to carry on a conversation. I know that was in jest. I appreciate you guys. Thank you for hanging out here tonight. Alpha Cat, thank you for the donation here at the end, just to say thank you. Thank you. Thank you guys for being here. I will definitely talk to you next Wednesday. Follow me on Twitter at JL Kurtz. Hit me up there if you have something. Try to be pretty responsive in the DMs. Spread the word to your friends, family, whoever, whether that's going to be over social media, word of mouth. Continue to grow this community. It's been awesome seeing this grow. The growth has been insane over the last month and a half as we continue to push toward like 15,000 here on the channel. So thank you. John-Kurtz-4 on Venmo if you're watching this taped and you want to support the channel. Take care, guys. Joe, I see you getting in there laughing at Dennis Dodd. All right. Get your shot in at Dennis Dodd, Joe. You paid $5 for it. I'll let you get in there with the Dennis Dodd LOL. I do appreciate the LOL. I like to go with that one a lot when I'm trying to make a point. Typically being an a-hole. When I'm trying to be an a-hole, that's a go-to. Okay. Take care, guys. I'll see you soon.